Welcome back to Good Revenue. We are here today with Heather Spilsbury. She recently became the CEO of 50/50 Women on Boards, and she was previously their COO and CMO. Welcome, Heather.
Hi, Neeta. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, it's our pleasure. I'm super excited to have you. I really love the mission of 50/50 Women on Boards and just really excited to talk to you about some of this. So why don't we actually jump right in? I'd love to know what drew you into the organization and maybe give us a little bit of context about the mission for folks who might not be familiar with it.
Sure. In 2020, I was sent home like everybody else with the pandemic. I had been in marketing and advertising my entire career and worked at a number of different agencies that were privately owned and had a great career and was really looking into what I was doing with my life and what was the purpose behind it and what was I doing in terms of adding value. And coincidentally, 2020 Women on Boards, which is now 50/50, reached out to me about the CMO position. I'd never heard of the organization and thought, this is incredible. I wasn't aware that there was actually nonprofits that were doing this work and facilitating these kind of conversations for women. I just got really excited about what it could be and took the leap into nonprofit. And it's a different beast, but it's also the same in terms of how companies operate. When people think, oh, you work for a nonprofit, it's very different. It's still a business. It's still something you have to market and gain visibility. You still need corporate fundraisers to know who you are. We're volunteer run. So we're not a membership organization. We heavily rely on corporate sponsors. Our mission is for women to hold at least 50% of the corporate board seats and women of color to hold at least 20%.
I love it. It's such an important mission. Just citing some of the data in your own report, I noticed one of the data points was that just 12% of Russell 3000 boards are gender balanced today. And one of the things that your annual report notes is that companies with less diverse boards are actually more likely to exit that list because of sales misses, mergers, bankruptcy, et cetera. We're preaching to the choir here because you don't have to convince me that diverse perspectives are a good thing. But what do you think people get wrong about diversity on corporate boards? Why does diversity matter?
Those are two good questions. I think what people get wrong is that diversity is a DE&I initiative or it's an ESG initiative. And it's not. It's a business case. There's a business reason behind it. Tons of research shows that diversity on corporate boards increases not only the profit of an organization, but also reduces the risk. It's really important for companies to look at it from that perspective. For example, if you're asking a question to the board and everybody is answering in the same manner, you don't have diversity of perspective and you can't anticipate what might come up if you had a diverse board. So those things to me seem pretty simple in terms of if you're a public company or even a private company, if you're looking to increase your revenue and reduce your risk, you should have a diverse board. And that includes women of color, men of color, etc. Diversity, when we look at gender diversity, women are still lacking on corporate boards.
One of the other things that I thought was a little bit discouraging was your research noted that 29% of board seats are held by women, and that's effectively flat year over year. Why do you think that is? It seemed like over the last decade, we were making a lot of progress. Why has that progress slowed?
We were making a lot of progress. So even between 2020 and 2022, the percentage of women joining boards was around 2 to 3%, just depending on the year. I think in particular, when we saw what happened with George Floyd, a lot of companies put emphasis on diversity and inclusion. And that meant also diversifying their boards because they were trying to showcase that they were a company that cared about issues that mattered in society, which is great. I think what has happened over the last year and why we've seen the pace slow is there's a couple reasons. Economic uncertainty always adds a wrench into the mix. And then companies think that they have to focus on their profits instead of diversifying their boards, which is a bit of an ironic situation because if you diversify your board, you have the propensity of increasing your profit. So it's important to keep your eye on the ball and say, hey, we're still going to do this. We're still going to succession plan and try and find the right candidates to fit the board matrix that we need and be intentional about it. I think it's always tough when there's an election year like this year coming up. We're trying to gain momentum on, of course, women joining boards. The law in California, SB 826, that was revoked in 2022 has something to do with it as well in terms of how companies and even states as a whole are looking at how they compete against states like California, who have the highest percentage of women on boards at 34%. So there's all these different factors that play a role. I also think that the backlash on DE&I and ESG has something to do with it, but it's not about that. This is a business tactic that companies need to focus on because it's good for business. It creates positive results. And to have a diverse board means you have diversity of perspective and thought and expertise, et cetera, but also you have people with different life experiences. So you and I could be asked the same question, but we're going to approach it in a different way.
It was really disappointing to see that law struck down. Some data indicates that 41% of companies still have boards with 2 or fewer women. Do you think 3 seats is a tipping point for the power of diversity?
Yes, absolutely. I think when you have 3, there's research that shows that you have a cohort of women who are able to have a voice. If you have 1, it's very difficult because you're the one and only.
Right.
And sometimes that 1 is also a woman of color. So she's the one and only woman, and she's the one and only woman of color, which makes it really difficult to have your voice heard or to be taken seriously. And when you have 2, people tend to think that you 2 are buddying up. Similar to what happens on the playground. It's, oh, they're friends, so that's why they're giving us this opinion. When you have 3, I think it's a much different conversation, especially if those 3 women have different perspectives. And that becomes something where people start to respect what's being said in the room. It definitely is a shift in dynamics for sure, especially when you look at a board that generally averages 9 board members. If you only have 2, you're up against a lot of men. And that can be difficult sometimes. 3 is much better. Companies can also add a board seat. They don't have to wait for somebody to retire. That's something that we always try to communicate as well.
We're working
Right.
It's
for women.
baffling.
Yeah.
It's baffling. But I hear what you're saying. There is power in numbers. And it almost seems like getting to 3 seats means we get past tokenism, right? Then we can have a real conversation about the data and the perspectives that board members are offering. I feel like that leads really perfectly into the recycling rate, which was something you and I had talked about before. We had Matt Miscardi on the show a few months ago, and he had some, he has amazing data that he shared. I felt like he really educated me about the challenge of the recycling rate problem. Can you talk about that? Because you've alluded to it before, that one of the challenges seems to be that it's so hard to get on a board anyway. If you are the one woman board member, other boards want you too. And it's a real problem because it seems to be a barrier to expanding diversity on boards.
In particular, women of color, they tend to get tapped for 3 or 4 board positions because somebody knows that they're already serving on XYZ public company board, then they feel confident bringing them onto their boards. It is tough for women to attain their first public company board seat, and really for anyone, because they want you to have that public company experience, or they want you to be the CEO of a public company. And for us, one of the things that we've done is launched our 50 Women to Watch for Boards campaign. Women that are finalists in those cohorts are board ready, but they're not already serving on a public company board. We did that intentionally because we wanted to make sure that there were new candidates that were in the mix and on a list that companies could tap into, or even recruitment firms. And it's important to tap new talent. If people have the right experience and can add value, then it's important to give them an opportunity. You can't just tap the same people over and over again because it becomes a limited pool. And again, it becomes exclusive. So we're trying to build inclusivity. We're trying to ensure that boards continue to diversify. We're trying to make sure they understand there are many candidates out there, especially women and women of color, who can fulfill that role. They just have to do their due diligence and look outside of their own network to tap those individuals.
Are there other barriers that you're particularly concerned about when it comes to reaching the goals for 50-50?
The mission is critical, and we just keep our eye on that in terms of how do we get to gender parity as quickly as possible. We've made a lot of progress over the last 10 years, which is incredible to see. And I think these next 10 years will be telling in terms of how we continue. One of the things I love about our research is that when women are in leadership positions, whether they're holding a CEO position, NomGov chair, or chair of the board, or even holding all 3, boards near gender parity, women are really bringing diversity with them and into the fold. They're really being intentional about it. Not that men aren't, but I think women are more propelled to do that because of the obstacles they face. For us, it's about continuing down this path, continuing to educate companies on the business case of it and the importance of it, also continuing to educate women in the pipeline about what they need to do to prepare themselves for board service is really important. And then building your network is key. I think for anyone out there who's looking for a board seat, whether it's nonprofit, private, or public, you have to build your network. Your network drives who you are as an individual. They validate you, they vouch for you, they can talk about you in a room. So it's key to understand what type of board you want to potentially serve on and how you make those inroads.
As the new CEO of 50/50, what's your vision for the nonprofit as you look out over the next few years?
That's a great question. One of the things that even when I first came on board was, how do we create this cycle of women who are coming in, we're providing them services in terms of education and putting them in strategic networking situations. Let's say they get on a board. How do we continue that cycle so that they continue on that path to the boardroom, whatever that might be? Some decide that nonprofit is where they want to stay. Some decide that they want to just stay on private boards, and others really want to pursue that public company board seat. But no matter what that journey is, how do we keep these women in our network and ensuring that they're also providing guidance to women who are newer in their career and mid-career stage and providing a service to them too? One of the things we're working on right now is really trying to identify how we connect our network together, because it's really important. We have a vast network of corporate directors who volunteer their time to coach women at our events. We have various groups of women who are in various stages of their career who can help each other and support each other on this path. So for us, it's connecting those dots and creating that 360 model where people feel supported, but they also feel propelled to give back.
Yeah, and that's one thing I love about your community. I really do have the sense that people are invested. When you're in an underrepresented community, sometimes we miss how important those networks are because you maybe haven't seen the fruits of it, but it doesn't mean that you don't have a network and you should be tapping into it. I think there's a lot of power in that.
What I love about this campaign is that we launched it last International Women's Day on March 8th, and we announced the finalists in June. And since then, 8 of those women have been appointed to public company boards. And it's incredible to see that impact and that progress. We want to continue down that path and ensure more women are getting on boards. We'll introduce our 2024 group at the end of June. I think what's telling is that they're a group that wants to support each other. If a board position isn't right for them, they tend to send it to the group or to individuals they know in the group who it might be right for. I think with anyone that's been appointed to a public company board, they've done their due diligence, they've decided what path they want to go down. And it's what we see a lot of, even in our workshops. We have incredible women that come to our Get On Board workshop that have incredible experience. But when you ask them to talk about themselves or explain who they are as an individual and what value they bring, they stumble on their words, or they don't feel comfortable doing that because, like all of us, we feel like we need to be humble. We shouldn't be talking about ourselves. But you can do it in a way where it's not boastful, but you're really just stating the facts. This is what I do. This is how I do it. And this is what value it brings to the board and why I want to serve on your board. I'm ready to serve on a public company board. The transformation from the first session to the second session is interesting to watch. Once they leave the workshop, or even our 50 Women to Watch, you see the confidence grow. You can only do something if someone tells you you can do it. Of course, you can tell yourself, and that's great. But if someone else says, yes, you can do that as well, that just creates a different drive in individuals, which is why it's important throughout your life. I think even for children, like I have 2 boys, and I always think they need to hear that they can do it. And there's a reason for that, because then they're propelled to go, okay, I can do this. I can actually be uncomfortable and get to a different place in my life because I've decided to stretch those muscles and do that for myself. Same thing here. It's something that happens from a societal standpoint where people change once they know how to present themselves and talk about themselves, which we love seeing.
You're so right. To your point, it's not obvious to people who maybe haven't seen a lot of folks like them in that context how to get there. And I do think leading by example is hugely powerful. What do you think other stakeholders who care about these goals could do? For example, shareholders that care about the issue, employees, other affiliated entities. Are there opportunities for those groups?
I think for shareholders, it's really important to make sure that's an emphasis and that you're also voting on that. There's a lot of proxy voting that can take place, and you have the opportunity to actually raise your hand and talk about diversity and say that it's something that needs to be a strategic effort amongst the board to be able to say, Yes, if you don't have it already, we're going to put succession planning in place. We're going to put term limits in place. We're going to ensure that we're looking for candidates. It's not something that you just do once and check the box and then move away. It's an ongoing process. You have to continue to diversify your board. People will retire or fall off or leave, or the term limit might run out. And what are you going to do? Are you going to scramble and look for a candidate, which leads to people just bringing people on that they know? So that planning piece is so important. I think also for employees, it's really important for them to ask questions. Even if you're going on a job interview and you're looking at a company and you're looking at their leadership, you should ask the question, why are there not more women on your leadership team? What does that mean for me in the future? Do women get promoted to leadership positions? Why does your board only have men on it? You can ask them in a way that's respectful, but also so you can inquire why that is. Because if you're about to join a company where there's not a lot of women at the top, that's something for you to consider. And we like to remind women that's important because it could stunt your growth in terms of your career, or maybe you get to where you want to be, but you have to leave at a certain point to then continue to excel. But there's a lot of things that individuals should do. It's important for people to speak up. We also tap those companies and say, hey, we're encouraging you to add another woman by the end of the year. We have a list available for you, and we have other organizations too that have lists if you're looking for a different type of candidate. The resources are there, they're not lacking, but it's the intentionality of the board and of their shareholders and stakeholders who really need to put an emphasis on why it's important for the business.
I love that you're actively reaching out to companies because you see the opportunity. How do they respond to that? Are they willing to talk to you? Are there any strategies that a board could take, or maybe it's one member of the board really sees the opportunity to diversify? How might they go about that?
Sometimes they reach out to us and say, thank you for bringing this to our attention. We're adding a woman to the board. It hasn't been made public yet. And that happens more with the companies that have 2 women on their board. I would say the companies that have 1 or 0, the shift for them is a lot different. It might be reasons behind why they only have 1 or no women on their board. We focus on companies with 2 women because if you add 1 more, you're at 3 women, which is fantastic. And then eventually you can get to gender parity. But it's key for companies to take notice. Even if they don't respond to us, we know they've received the inquiry. If they get enough inquiries, they're required to bring it up as part of a board discussion. Is encourage people to reach out to their investor relations and remind them to add a woman to their board. We used to do this through an email campaign, but a lot of individuals said they didn't like that we were calling out these companies. We said we're encouraging them to add another woman, and it's important because if you back this up, then they're required to bring it up. They're required to have the conversation.
That's fascinating. It's encouraging on the one hand that like the folks that have 2 members already are that there's so much opportunity. But what is going on with companies that have 0 or 1 woman on the board and then are so resistant to adding? It's just so interesting to me. Is there any research or any insights around what is going on with that cohort?
I don't know if there's any research around it, but anecdotally, I think it's just a matter of people wanting to keep capital to themselves within their own network. There are people out there that still don't believe this is a business imperative. They don't believe that they need to diversify their board for various reasons, right? Some that are appalling and some that are just smaller and haven't had the time. Those companies have decreased over time, which is great, especially the 0 companies. And soon they're going to be the only companies with no women on their board or no diversity on their board. And that's going to be telling because you have to evolve and transform how you do business. It's important. Things move so fast. It's critical for companies to say, we need this type of expertise, but we can also find it with a different candidate. We don't have to just pull from our immediate network. It goes back to that intentionality piece. How much are you focusing on this effort? Who are you bringing in to help you? That's also key. Are you asking your board members to also look outside of their network and to try and find the right candidates? Are you tapping organizations like ours? Are you telling your recruitment firm to make sure that they're looking for a woman or a woman of color and being very specific in that request and getting those candidates back? Are you looking at candidates without bias? And that's also key because you can get a set of candidates in front of you and pick the one you feel most comfortable with, but that may not be the right decision because you have someone in the room who's telling you something you already know.
I was amazed to see in the data the number of members that are over the age of 75. It's really shocking, especially given our country. We're having a lot of debate about the age that is appropriate for leadership. These are such salient conversations, but my hope is that as some of these folks do eventually age out, there are more opportunities for women and people of color.
The average age is around 56 for women and a little older for men. We have seen that age decrease over time, meaning there are more individuals in their 50s, which companies feel very comfortable about because you've had a career, you've had experience.
Right.
Maybe you're even retired now. You're able to serve on a public company board, and expertise you have is very different from someone who's still in an operational role. It just depends on the individual. Sometimes boards do a great job bringing in Gen X individuals to say, hey, they're younger and have had a shorter lifespan in their career, but they bring expertise that we need. That can be an opportunity. You can look at it from that perspective in terms of bringing someone in, or even inviting leadership to come in and present to the board is a great way to help prepare people in the company for what it takes to serve on a board and giving them some insight into how that works. So all of these things play a factor and a role. I think with age, it's decreased over time, but there are a lot of individuals who are 70 and above who it's time for them to term out and retire. And that's why term limits are so important.
I'm just curious to know if people want to get more involved with your organization, how can they do that?
They can visit 5050wob.com. It's our website. You can find opportunities for how to engage there. If you're a woman who's looking for a board seat, we have several workshops that are fantastic and are led by faculty and corporate directors. And we have events throughout the year that help connect you with corporate board directors and your peers so that you can strategically network. If you're a board-ready woman and you want to apply for 50 Women to Watch, that'll be open next year for application. If you're someone that's already serving on a board and you want to climb by being a director coach in your region or by volunteering by being a chair in your local region, we welcome that as well. There's plenty of ways to get involved. You can donate. You can be a corporate funding partner, which we love because then we get to have the opportunity to help women in the corporation advance as well and give them educational tools that the company is looking for so they're not having to build it themselves.
I love it. One last question before we let you go. You had such a great and diverse experience yourself. What do you think that high performance boards or high performance companies do that's different from average performers?
Wow, that's a good question. I think in general, it comes down to making sure that you have the right expertise on the board. It's similar to being in leadership. You don't want to be the smartest person in the room. You want to surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, people that have different experience, people that can add value. It's important to have diverse voices. It's important to not have people that are just yes people, but people that are challenging you to think about things differently from different perspectives. So whether that's a marketing perspective, operational perspective, risk perspective, cybersecurity or AI, all of those things matter. I think that helps a company excel beyond what they could have done if it was just people that they were surrounded with. And I think that is true for anybody in any type of role, especially a leadership position. You want to bring in people who are going to be valuable to the organization and who are going to open your eyes to different experiences and how you should operate or function or how you should strategically plan for something. If something doesn't go right, how do you mitigate that risk or how do you prepare for that risk in advance?
Heather, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciated having you, and thank you for sharing so much insight about all the great work 50/50 is doing. Thanks so much for listening to Good Revenue. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to the show, give us a rating, or leave us a review. It helps other listeners find us, and we really appreciate your support. You can also catch full videos and highlights on our YouTube channel.